For this episode of Interview, we're joined by the EU Ambassador to the UAE, Andrea Matteo Fontana. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you begin by telling me what your role is here in the UAE?
Thank you, Jane, of course. So we have opened our European Union delegation here in 2013. And the reason is that we want to strengthen our cooperation with this country. So my role here is to intensify the bilateral relations with the UAE, but also to explain to the people here, to the population, to the public, what the EU is about.
How would you describe relations between the EU and the UAE?
Now, the relationship are good. I think they're growing. I think they have potential. And they're strategic. And I think that our interest here is to work with the UAE on several strands. That is important. We are one of the major trading blocs for the UAE. Last year we had a trading in goods that was around 15 billion euro, and that puts us in the top three of the trading blocs with the country. For us, investment is important. You have a lot of European investors here. But it's also about how to look at the future and how we can exchange knowledge and experience with the country. And I'm thinking about economic diversification. I think this is a very important issue for the UAE, who wants to diversify from an economy which was based on oil and wants to change.
Well, you mentioned the key strategies that you are looking at, and in particular trade and the economy. That's very difficult to push forward in the current climate. This is a global pandemic that we're all going through. You know, what are the challenges that come with that, especially for those areas?
I think that, in a nutshell, the crisis has shown that globalization is important, but when a crisis like this one strikes, then the consequences on the economy, on supplies, on making sure that things are in the right moment, in the right place, are very, very huge and difficult to solve in the short term. I think that we need protection, but not protectionism. We don't want isolation. We want to have continued global collaboration.
There are a lot of EU expats living here. You know, how important is it to know that you have a presence and that this work is going on behind the scenes, especially now?
So for this, the month of April has been incredibly intense for all of us, especially for the colleagues in the embassies. Try to find the right planes to go back to the different countries in Europe. And this has been part of a huge effort that the EU has undertaken together with the member states around the world, where we have made sure then more than 500,000 tourists could go back to their homes in Europe. And then after that, the main challenge is for residents to come back. But I think that with the gradual reopening of the country and with the protocols that the UAE has established now with the airports, in the coming weeks, we're going to solve this problem together. And one thing that has been very successful in this country, I believe, is the high degree of testing that the authorities have been making available to all the people living here. And this has been, I think, one of the determining factors that led now the country to reopen and Dubai to restart welcoming tourists from today.
Well, coming out of the crisis, what is the role of the EU in Europe, and also what part will the UAE have to play in that, in the exit plan from this, so to speak?
Well, for Europe, I think that the challenge will be to come out of this together. We have gradually eliminated the restrictions of movement that were put up at the beginning for safety reasons. So now the EU is once again open and you can travel freely within the Union. And then we have also looked outside the EU, the importance of solidarity with countries who have less than Europe.
Globally, the economy has taken a bit of a hammering throughout this whole pandemic. What strategies and post-pandemic strategies need to be adopted to make sure that we do navigate ourselves through this period?
It's going to be a challenge for all of us. I mean, the economy took quite a battering because of the crisis. Let's be honest about it. And this is the most severe crisis that the EU has ever had in its entire history. I mean, the gross domestic product of some of the member states and many countries in the world this year will be reduced by 5 to 10%. This is something unprecedented since the time of the Great Depression at the beginning of the last century. So that's to say that the challenges are enormous. I mean, a lot of people are losing their jobs, a lot of companies are closing. So this is an opportunity for governments, for international organizations like the EU, to show that our response can make a difference. At the level of the EU, we have proposed a next generation EU program, which will be funded with 750 billion euros. So that's a very important amount of money that is made available there. This proposal, which still needs to have the approval of all the member states, is something that looks at the economy of the future.
But how much control has to be left to local governments across Europe in particular to get themselves back on their feet and get their country moving again?
Member states remain responsible for their economic choices. I mean, the EU is there to support them, it's not there to dictate them. But I think that the most important thing is to try and have a common response to what is a common problem. And then together, I think we can navigate through this crisis, but there cannot be one recipe for all the member states because the economies are different, the demography is different. So we have to leave them, some leeway in adapting the recipes to what are the local challenges.
Well, here in the UAE, we have Expo 2020 happening next year in Dubai. Why is it important to make sure that that is a success and that contributes to the local economy here in particular?
I will be the Commissioner General for the EU during Expo. And the importance of it, I think, is changing. I believe that it's difficult to predict what is going to happen until next year, but I believe that Expo 2020 will be one of the first global events after the pandemic has finished or has decreased substantially, thanks to all the efforts that we're investing in the vaccine and so on. Therefore, it will be one of the first events where we can exchange experiences and learn from each other. And for that, I think that the motto is still very appropriate, connecting minds, creating the future. We're going to look at how together we can create a future that is more sustainable, where there is more solidarity.
Ambassador Andrea Matteo Fontana, thank you so much for talking to us today. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Jane. It was my pleasure. Thank you.